Hello everyone, and welcome to the first online event of the WISE Edtech Accelerator. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who we're meeting for the first time, my name is Victoria. I'm the manager of the WISE Edtech Accelerator. If you haven't already, please make sure to check out our page at the end of this session, where we'll have more information on how to apply to our 2021 program. I'll be attaching a link in the chat shortly. Now, to begin our program today, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. Joining us, we have Danish Faruqui, a partner at LEK Consulting, a global strategy consulting firm that helps clients achieve high impact results with deep industry expertise. Danish will be taking us through a macro overview of India's edtech market before we move into our panel discussion. So with that said, Danish, over to you.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you everyone at the WISE Accelerator team for hosting this wonderful event and for giving me an opportunity to speak here. So team, as Victoria mentioned, I'm a partner at LEK's global education practice. As a quick introduction, we are a strategy consulting firm with more than 19 offices now, actually, headquartered out of Boston, headquartered out of London. And the team that I'm part of, which is the LEK's global education practice, we're a fairly unique bunch. We are about 80 consultants, and all we do is education. Most of our consulting team is based out of India, and we serve clients all the way from Latin America to China. One of the sectors, as you could imagine, that we are looking at increasingly now within education is the edtech space. Within that space, and which is the topic of discussion today, which is the India edtech opportunity, I'm going to keep my conversation limited to three main points. One, I'm going to talk about, just put some numbers on how this sector has become one of the key investment sectors currently, but more importantly, why I believe that this sector still has a long way to go. Second, within the Indian context, which are the subsectors within this edtech space that excite me the most and where I believe that there is a lot of opportunity and companies in those subsectors are most likely to succeed. And finally, I leave you with some thoughts on how to succeed as you struggle, as you grow in this hyper-competitive space. So with that, let me get down to the presentation. As I had mentioned, we all know that edtech is now becoming a prominent investment sector. Just over the last 4 years, there has been a 50% CAGR growth in PE investments in this space, as has been the case with the VC investments. In 2020, if you look at the investments, there were nearly $40 billion and another $15 billion from VC that had gone into the space. What is even more exciting for me personally is that a lot of Indian companies have also achieved scale, both in terms of valuation, but also in terms of revenue over the last few years. Now, I've been working in the education space for over a decade now. And I can tell you, this is the first time that India has become a prominent investment destination for this sector, for funds and investors looking at this sector. So of course you have Baiju, which has achieved massive scale, but you also see a lot of new companies that are coming up that are towards the end of this chart, but really we see a lot of growth in them, and we are pretty certain that you will see a lot of these companies and newer ones coming up on this chart. Part of the reason is, of course, the massive market and the opportunity, but quite frankly, also regulations in India have had a role to play. If you look at all the other traditional sectors, in India, it's not for profit from an education perspective, and therefore the only way for investors to cleanly get and invest in the education sector in India sometimes remains these edtech companies. And like I said, we think that this is really just the beginning of the story. We talk to a lot of consumers and a lot of stakeholders. And if you look at how preferences have changed pre-COVID and post-COVID, clearly there has been a significant jump in the adoption of online education, both at the K through 12 sector and even in the adult education sector. But what's been even more interesting is that this increase in adoption has happened across tier of cities. Not only is there a higher adoption in tier 1, but even in tier 2, tier 3 and beyond, you see a lot more adoption for online education. And when we talk to the consumers, we find that there is a high level of satisfaction that is there. If you combine these two facts with the data that really, even after you combine all these big providers together and you look at all their enrollments currently, they still form less than 5% of the potential market. So the headroom for growth is significant, and clearly these providers are doing something good and the consumers have a need that the satisfactions also seem to be high. But now the question is to the second part of the conversation, which is, well, but which subsectors are actually more attractive? Now, here's my view. I mean, people could have a slightly differing view as well. But if I look at it from two perspectives, one, how much disruption is there because of digital and how much of that has happened during COVID on one axis, and on the other axis, if you put our view on the stickiness of this disruption, i.e. the sectors we believe that people are going to continue to use online even after this COVID situation is over, right? If you look at the combination of both of these axes, the sectors which are very interesting. One, of course, we all know about K-12 and supplemental. There's a lot happening there in online tutoring, synchronous, asynchronous, etc. In content, which is supplemental coding, all of those things put together. But we also see a lot of opportunity in higher education, be it through MOOCs, upskilling, online higher education, providing online support services to higher education institutions. For example, we've got Akshay today, he'll talk about recruiting students for global universities, that's picking up. But also when you talk about tools and supporting tools for enabling institutions to go online, be it through LMSs or various engagement tools. These are the subsectors where we think there is going to be a lot of traction for digital and edtech. Sectors like K-12 online schooling or non-academic enrichment, etc. They are the ones which we feel maybe there is some pickup during COVID, but really we don't see currently these sectors really disrupting and growing fast. And if you look at the providers that have come up in India and across the globe as well, especially in the APAC region, you would find that the scale providers tend to mirror these subsectors as well. So you'll find a lot of online tutoring, upskilling, ELT, depending on which country you're talking about, supplemental content, and then of course you have all the service providers and content providers to existing institutions. But here's the thing. This market is also getting very crowded. If you just look at K through 12 sort of kids learning apps, which is sort of a proven segment right now, you'll find that every month, 15 to 30, depending on the month, new apps are being launched in India. So clearly, though this is an attractive opportunity, there is a lot of competition. So in my last piece of the conversation today, I'll give you some thoughts on what I think could take to succeed in this competitive environment. And I look at it again as a lead framework. So you need to look at two aspects. You need to look at capital and what I call the happiness lead. Let me explain. Capital, if you look at any of these subsegments, you'll find that the companies that have been able to break out eventually are the ones that were able to attract a reasonable amount of funding from the right type of investors fairly early. And then the bleed that they built over their competitors just kept growing. So having your business model articulated and clear upfront, is very important. The ability to show revenues quickly is also very important. But on the other axis, to sustain that lead and quite frankly, even to attract some of this capital is what I call the happiness lead. What essentially that indicates is that you pick a segment there where there is a lot of use case, but then you work on delivering those outcomes. You work on delivering satisfaction. And I know this happiness lead can be a little bit of a fuzzy sort of indicator. So let me give you a case study to close my conversation today on what do I mean by successfully going on this happiness lead journey. I'll talk about one of the upcoming sectors, which is upskilling. So if you look at it, there is a clear need where there, there are various studies on this, but really the answer is if you look at the skill gap that's going to be there between, especially for new age skills, that's going to increase from about 350,000 to 1.2 million in India. So there's clearly a use case. But you know what? What companies have done very well, the incumbents, especially the top 2 or 3 that they've done very well, is actually work on providing outcomes to those students. So we've done a detailed study of looking at LinkedIn, talking to consumers and students who have used this. And what we find is that nearly 50% of the students that entered these courses, that undertook these courses, were able to achieve the outcomes that they had thought that they had wanted to achieve at the beginning of the programs, be it switching jobs, be it getting into a new role, or even getting a first job. So, and what this would mean is over a period of time, if you're able to get your NPS high through focusing on outcomes, that's what would lead to more organic growth, lower CAC, and better sustainability of the business model. I promised the panel discussion team that I'm going to close within 10 minutes, so I'm going to stick to that time. But thank you so much, everyone, for taking our time and coming to this wonderful event. These are my coordinates. You can reach out to me. Clearly, I don't look like this anymore. So this is a reflection of pre-pandemic, working with my team only before the pandemic, and since then working from home. But once again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking our time. And I'm sure you'll have a wonderful conversation and session in this event.
Thank you so much, Danish. I'm going to hand over to our moderator now, Anshul Arora, who'll be leading us through the panel discussion. For those of you who have just joined us, if you have any questions for our panelists, please do make sure you drop them into the chat. Thank you.
Good morning and evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Anshul Arora. I'm the co-founder of Advance Group. We identify and help spread education best practices around the world. Our main focus of work in India has been in setting up a chain of progressive preschool and childcare centers in partnership with the Singapore group. And that's the context with which I bring background to the conversation today. I am very privileged to host and moderate this panel with 3 people leading companies defining different spaces in EdTech in India. And I have Smita Diora, who's with Lead. Actually, I'll let each of you introduce yourselves if I can. Let me share a little bit of the structure of the panel. The goal here is really to get a wide group of participants to better understand the opportunity in EdTech in India. And so each of the panelists has offered to share a little background on their company, where they see the opportunity in their subsegment of education, where they have experienced challenges in that space, and therefore what kind of advice they may have for people looking at the opportunity in India. So we have Smita and Phalgun and Akshay. Maybe I could request you to go each in turn to share a little bit about K-12 upskilling and student recruitment in turn. And after that, we'll have a little bit of an open discussion. If you do have questions, please do post them in the chat, and we'll do our best in the short time we have to get to those. And then finally, at the end, we're going to have a little bit of a networking session. So lots packed in, but we'll try and follow in Danish's footsteps. Danish, it always impresses me tremendously how much you pack in such a short time. So we will try and follow suit. With that, a warm welcome to the panelists and the attendees, and let me hand over to Smita.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Anshul. I think it's interesting that I start the panel because Danish just on the slide showed that K-12 doesn't have K-12 EdTech does not have much growth, and I guess that chart will change soon. So just as context, what LEAD does is we work with affordable private schools across the country, K-12 schools from nursery to grade 10, and we make them better. And the way we make them better is by significantly transforming the way the school operates, because then we bring in our system and the school operates on our system. And that results in significant improvement in student outcomes, which really is the deeper problem of education in India. I think there's enough data and reports published, whether it is the ACER report, whether it is any of the other publications like I know Azim Premji has done a lot of work, and McKinsey has done a lot of work. We all know that core foundational skills and core learning skills amongst children across the country are very, very low. And what we do is transform that. And in all of the schools, we basically deliver assured outcomes improvement for all of the students. We started our journey back in 2012, but I would say that really the first part, the first 4 years was really figuring out how do you really improve outcomes. There was a lot of tinkering. We were running our own schools in the first few years. And the way LEAD works today, where we partner with other schools, is something that we started only back in 2017. And we've seen rapid growth since then. We started in the first year with around 30 schools. As of today, we partner with 2,000 schools across the country. We serve around 1 million students, and that's what we do. And I think when Anshul asked me about opportunities and challenges, I think to me the answer is really in student outcomes. I think the biggest opportunity and the biggest need really is to truly improve learning outcomes. And if I can be very candid, I think the problem that India has faced for the longest time is we've been very exam focused, and a lot of the innovation that has happened, unfortunately, has also happened in the space of test prep. I see it as, okay, we're just making more people better at that rat race. But we all know as educators and as entrepreneurs that the deeper problems are in the foundational skills, much before students actually get to the test prep phase. While that is also important, I think the real big opportunity is improvement in learning outcomes on knowledge, skills, habits, and mindsets, where we can make a significant shift in a large number of students. I mean, in K-12, I know we have around 300 million students, school-going children in the country. That's a very large user base. And that's really the big opportunity. And there are many things to be done there, really, right? And I think that is also a challenge, because improving outcomes is not an easy problem to solve. It's a complex problem to solve. And I'm sure my colleagues who are running different companies in different areas find the same thing. Engagement and improving engagement and getting to high DAUs and engagement is really the tip of the iceberg. It's on the surface, but the real deal is, can you go deeper and can you improve outcomes? Can you show that outcome improvement very visibly to all your users and your stakeholders? And that's when you will see strong growth. That's when you will see that you'll be able to scale very sustainably in the future. So I think my advice is, go for the tougher problem, focus on improving outcome. It might mean that the journey is a little or feels a little slower in the beginning, but then what you'll see is very high customer retention, very high stickiness, to your solution in whichever education space that you work on. So yeah, so I'll hand over, Anshul, back to you.
Let me just ask one question. First, it shouldn't be refreshing, but it is refreshing that you're talking about learning outcomes. I mean, that is the basic starting point on why we're all here. And for the audience who are not from India, they probably will come to know that there's been huge improvements in enrollment rates into schools, but quality benchmarks tend to be very, very low. Now, in building a business in this space, world over, it tends to be very difficult to sell into schools, if you will. Can you just share an insight around that? What has been your experience selling products into schools?
I think to be very candid about this, I think, see, we were ourselves school operators, Anshul, and I feel that when I now compare us and I compare maybe some of the other product companies who've struggled, I think the big difference is we know what it is like to be a school owner, to be a principal. We understand their operational challenges very intimately, and because of that, we've always had a design principle where we're focused on student outcome, and we're focused on tremendous simplicity and efficiency for all the stakeholders at school. So the delight really comes when the schools see their work reduce and they see student outcomes improve, and they're able to see that at as a very strong value proposition, and that's when you see stickiness. So I think that's really the difference. In most places, what I've seen is, or in most situations, the difficulty in selling to school is that it is really tough, or the school does not see that value and the improvement in efficiency in their institution, which is a very important element for them, because they are trying to sort of optimize their P&L and their spend pool.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll probably come back to you towards once everyone has introduced themselves. Phalgun, can I hand over to you?
Sure, thanks, Anshul. Just briefly introducing UpGrad. So first of all, my name is Phalgun and I'm one of the co-founders of UpGrad. UpGrad is the largest online higher education platform in India. And basically, to summarize in one sentence, we work with universities to design, develop, and then deliver world-class online programs. These could be 6-month certificate programs, 12-month diploma programs, 2-year masters, to even a 4-year PhD program. So we work across the spectrum, but we work with universities and their faculty closely, as I said, to design, develop, and then deliver these programs. So currently we have about 25 university partners, combination of India, US, UK, Australia. So we have a global campus where we work with these universities, and currently we have a portfolio of about 100 programs in collaboration with these 25 universities. To come to our experience, and I think I will it's very similar to what Smita mentioned earlier. I think the greatest opportunity and the challenge when it comes to even higher education is to deliver outcomes at scale. That's both the biggest opportunity and that's also the biggest challenge. So whenever we think of our learning experience or what we want to achieve, we say that, look, let's say we are delivering this particular program. Imagine one student in the classroom and we are pretty confident we will deliver outcomes. And imagine 10 students in the classroom and we're pretty sure we'll deliver outcomes for all 10. But imagine doing that at 10,000 students, and that's where things start to break down, right? In terms of how do you divide them into various pools? Everybody starts at a different point. Everybody has different aspirations and motivations. And how do you get outcomes for all of them with that kind of diversity and at that kind of scale becomes the most exciting opportunity, but also the most important challenge to solve for. And that's where every time we design a program, we design the learning experience, we keep this in mind to make sure that we are able to personalize the journey enough to deliver learning outcomes and career outcomes for all of our learners. The second part, and just to clarify on outcomes, I think this was a major learning for us. When we started off 6 years back, our biggest true north was completion rates, right? We said, look, online completion rates is a problem, 5%, 10%, whatever number, we want to take that to 80%. And I think it was a good metric to start with. That we achieved 90% completion rates fairly quickly. And then we said, okay, now let's measure NPS, which is the Net Promoter Score. Even in 12 months after we started tracking NPS, we realized that in education can also be a false metric, right? The easiest thing for my team to do to optimize NPS is to give you 3 more days to complete your assignment, right? Or to give you 9 out of 10 instead of 7 out of 10 and you're happy and you give me a good NPS. But that doesn't really help. So in our journey, we realized that it is important to optimize for what Danish and Smita mentioned earlier, which is true outcomes in terms of career change. It could be transition to a new job. It could be acceleration in your job. It could just be you feeling more confident about the work you do. Could be anything, but that is what is most important. And that's where we changed all of those metrics now to reflect career outcomes NPS post 12 months of completing the program, so that you take a contextual view of what the program achieved for you. And I think those outcomes are something that we're trying to optimize. And as I said, that is the biggest opportunity. And that's also the biggest challenge in terms of doing that at scale. I think the second biggest opportunity in India is, I think Danish touched upon this earlier, was that we are just scratching the surface on everything, right? If you look at the size of the opportunity in what Smita is doing or what Akshay is doing or what we are trying to do at UpGrad, the opportunity is just massive as long as you're able to create the right value proposition and deliver on outcomes. And the penetration or the headroom in each of these markets is huge. And I think that is something that is really exciting. And my advice, therefore, would be that for anybody who is looking at Indian EdTech, I think the first is that outcomes are key and you need to create your value propositions accordingly. And it's a long-term game. Right? I don't think it's going to happen in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. When we look at this and say that, look, what can we achieve over the next 30 years? I think that's what gets, at that point, it gets really exciting in terms of how you want to solve some of these challenges. And I think there is massive value add in terms of taking that long-term view in terms of how you want to solve for some of these problems. So, and the second advice to wrap it up would be that for us, my personal experience has been when we started off, we focused a lot on, and everybody talks about product and outcomes and everything else. And I think that is very important. Without that, there is not much you can achieve. And it is definitely not going to be sustainable even if you grow in your initial years. But I think with that, it is important to be very savvy with your acquisition, which is sales and marketing, right? If you take this holier than thou approach of, I have a great product, I have a great value proposition, I'm delivering outcomes and people will come to me, that is not going to happen. Right? It will not happen in India, and I doubt it will happen anywhere in the world. So I think having a realistic approach towards a strong acquisition strategy is important for you to evangelize the product and then scale your product and create that cycle where you can continue to sustainably grow. So it's not, obviously the first core thing is your product and your outcomes and how you do that at scale. But I don't think you can afford to ignore or take the holier than thou approach when it comes to figuring out a smart acquisition strategy for whatever you're doing.
When you look at outcomes, how much of that is learning around, learning outcomes around specific courses versus or in addition to job placement? I mean, we looked at what Danish was sharing about why people come to some of these upskilling courses. So can you just talk a little bit about how you think about job placement in your value proposition?
Yeah, sure. So I think, Anshul, at the end of the day, even when we deliver learning outcomes, the purpose of those learning outcomes is to help people do a better job, right? It could be in their existing job or figure out a new job. So the way we think of our product design is that how will this help the person who is joining this program achieve their career outcomes? It could be, I'm a software developer and I want to move to data science, right? Let's take that basic construct. Now, how do you make sure that your program delivers on the learning outcomes in terms of that person needs to be great at Python? That person needs to be great at hypothesis testing. That person needs to be great at figuring out what machine learning models to deploy when. Deliver these learning outcomes to then figure out that you have enough market intelligence in terms of what jobs exist, right? So even when we start with the product design, even in the product design phase, we keep that in mind and say that, look, based on all of our interactions, this is where there is a lot of skill gap and there is a lot of demand. This is what we need to do to give people that opportunity, and let's design that program accordingly. The objective of the program, obviously, is to deliver strong learning outcomes and do the final matchmaking to ensure that they get the career outcome. So right from day one, when we're designing the program, we have outcomes defined for each person. So our product document or brief document before we launch would look like, okay, these are the 3 sets of learners we expect will derive value from this program. This is where they potentially start. These are the skills that they will pick up, and this is where they will potentially end in terms of outcome roles after each of these programs.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phalgun. I'll come back to you again as well. Akshay, over to you, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Anshul, and great to be speaking alongside Smita and Phalgun, both phenomenal operators. Very simply, Leverage Edu, which I represent on this panel today, helps Indian students study abroad. And we largely, if I have to just take a step back, the larger mission here is to help people understand what is right for them in terms of career options. If I have to take a step back, think about when I look at Indian education, post-freedom, we have had 3 phases. So the first phase was people following the communist approach and saying that, hey, everybody should do a medicine course or an engineering program, and that's about it. And then came the 1990s, India got liberalized. People said, hey, everybody should do an MBA. Let's do an MBA, let's do business management, let's do finance. Those are all the cool degrees. And the third phase, which I call the post-3 idiots phenomenon, and where everybody started to realize that it's important to do what you're really a good fit for. It's important to pursue what you're really great at. And once you do that, everything else will fall in place. To kind of borrow from the last line of the movie, which Rancho, the lead character, says. And I think what we've been doing over the last couple of 4 years, last 4 years more specifically, is helping Indian students across a large, the very disparate country that this is, understand, one, what is right for them in terms of career options. And second, then kind of help them understand that not every career option / profession will have the same reputation and the same economic opportunities in the same country. And you might have to kind of move abroad for that. So when you look at, say, my favorite example is Chef Vikas Khanna. Back in 2000s, early 2000s, had Vikas Khanna been told by his BG that ek kaam kar khote tu Punjab Engineering College chale jaa and do an engineering degree from here. So Vikas Khanna would have been on a panel like this, but he wouldn't have been Master Chef Vikas Khanna that he is, and having dinner with the Obamas and the Queen and all of those places that he goes to, and being the great culinary art specialist that he is. Or even if I look back at my own life, 10 years back, I was a huge football fan and I was a huge EPL fan. Had I known that there's this university called St. Mary's University in Twickenham, London, which after you pursue a program for 3 years gives you a guaranteed internship in Chelsea Football Club, which is a 14-month internship, I would have gone ahead and done that. I wouldn't have wasted my time around and doing an MBA, which possibly does not add as much value to a football fan or to somebody who would have kind of built out a career in sports management. So I think that is really changing in India right now. So lucky to be where we are at the moment. I'm right now sitting in Cochin. Last week I was in Kent in Haryana. Next week I am in Moga in Punjab. And I think that's a beauty of the opportunity that this is, helping Indian students figure out, one, what is right for them. Two, also help them explore these out-of-the-box options where they can really seize those right economic opportunities for themselves, whether it be automotive in Germany or fashion in Paris or culinary arts in large parts of Western Europe or the UK, or be it finance in Hong Kong, Singapore or whatnot. So I think that is really important. In terms of services, we start right from helping these folks get counseled to then helping them with their applications, to then also adding a bunch of value-added services. So once they get their offers from the university, we're helping them with education loans, visa, accommodation options, forex, all of that. Also now helping these guys with banking needs once they move abroad. So pretty long life cycle per se, and a lot to do for the student through the entire journey, and that keeps us very excited. Good to be here, and looking forward to learn from all of you. I also, by the way, plus one to what Phalgun said around having a very solid acquisition strategy and focusing on that. You could have the best product in the world, and sometimes it's not enough. So important to focus on all of those things that you guys speak about, learning outcomes, making sure the kid is doing well. But as a business, very important for you to understand what works with the Indian audience, and that radically is very, very different from anywhere else in the world. And yeah, I'm just coming back from a day where I've spent about my last 8 hours speaking to students who were speaking in Malayalam, and I was trying to grapple with whatever English I know. And those are always my learnings. You should really try and get inside the head of the customer. It's always thinking in a absolutely opposite direction to what you might be thinking from a VC lens or an entrepreneurial lens or what else. So yeah, that's largely it. Happy to kind of come in later and answer any questions as well.
Actually, I don't think there could be a more important point for people who are looking outside into India and looking at opportunities in India than to know that you need to deeply understand the customer and what that customer looks like in different geographies, in different, in different areas within India. One of the questions in the chat asks about the Indian contests tend to be very focused on exams, right? And when you all talk about learning outcomes, and I think the question was directed to you, Smita, right? Is when you think about learning outcomes, are they similar to those exams or are they different? And if anyone else wants to chime in, please feel free.
So I think, see, in K-12, the exam outcomes that we currently have is honestly, in complete transparency, is the problem, right? Because I think if you look at CBSE board, or if you look at any of the boards, we are testing students for knowledge and information and how much they recall. We're not really testing for application of their skills. And, if all the energy is focused towards preparing for these exams, which are high stakes, and hence it's important for students to succeed there, but these are not representative of what they'll deal with in life. So I think for learning outcomes, at least the way we've gone about it is, when you work with a school, you actually don't really have to get into the exam prep part till the time students get to 9th and 10th. You have you have almost 11, 12 years with them, right? All the way from nursery to grade 8. And hence the way we've looked at outcomes is we've said, what are the knowledge, skills, habits, and mindsets they need? A great starting point for Indians is the National Curriculum Framework, NCF. That's a beautiful document, though that's not what any of the board exams test for. And then basically, at least what we've done is we've looked out and we've looked and benchmarked and compared with some of the best countries around the world. And the easiest way to see that is which are your top 10 countries rated on PISA, and consistently over the past few years. Singapore is one of them. We've actually borrowed a lot or learned a lot from how Singapore outcomes work. How do they work across grades? So we've sort of increased the level in a way of saying that, hey, the outcomes that we will gun for are those which truly prepare these children for life. So I can take the example of, let's say, English language, right? Now, English language is a language skill. In the board exam, for me to remember a chapter from the textbook or a story from the textbook and write answers, I mean, that's not checking whether I actually can proficiently use the language on my own. The real test of language is, can I read a complex piece of text on my own and comprehend some deeper layers and answer questions? And I think preparing students for things like that is how we measure learning outcomes. So that's the reason why I would differentiate. When I said test prep, I was saying it is more towards the board examination. There is, with NEP, the government is starting to move in a direction where they are trying to go away from knowledge to skills. I still feel that there is a journey to be covered. NEP is definitely a significant improvement versus what we have today. The implementation will take another 5 to 7 years. But even NEP is still behind what some of the countries, the top PISA rated countries are doing. So I think as Indians or as a country, there is a learning journey for us to cover.
So that when you talk about these outcomes, each student is often coming from a different place and a different background and different vantage point, right? And in order for us to customize to that student, as Akshay was saying earlier, you think about this big conversation in education around the personalization of education, right? Especially with new technologies. So there's a question that's come in, Phalgun, to you, which is when you think about reaching quality at scale, which you talked about, how do you think about personalizing that learning process based on where different students are coming from?
Yeah, I mean, even before UpGrad, I was in education for a little bit with Parthenon and spent 4 to 5 years. And my experience says that everybody uses the word personalization when they're in EdTech, but they don't know what they're doing, right? And it's a very loaded word. So I will stay away from the word personalization. But what I can talk about in terms of what we do is that when a learner is, let's say, doing one of our master's programs, right? We have a very clear indication of where that learner is starting in terms of, do you have a job, what job, which city are you in, what's your salary level, what are your existing skill sets based on your job, and that's the starting point. And we figure out what are your aspirations and where you want to get to. And if it is unrealistic, you would have not enrolled in the first place, but assuming there is a realistic transition possible over the 2 years, we have that clear, and now we start working with that learner in the program. Now, one of the things that happens, and this is the beauty of doing something online, is over the course of those 2 years, we collect almost close to 180,000 data points in terms of what that learner is doing on the platform. When the learner logs in, when they log out, do they prefer to study in the evening, on the weekend, to the extent that we know if a learner has dragged back the video by 2 minutes, a particular video multiple times, which means that concept is not clear to that learner. So the idea is that there is a lot of data available. Now, we are still scratching the surface very honestly in terms of what we can do with that data to personalize, to use that term, the experience for that learner. One of the things that we do very well is right now it is not as much technology enabled, but what technology tells us is it gives us various flags to intervene in the learning experience, right? So we get a flag saying that something as simple as Akshay has not logged in for the last 7 days, right? Do something about it, right? Or Akshay has fallen behind his assignment, right? Basic intervention points are defined, which are flagged. And then we have a lot of academic, non-academic and career support services put in place. It could be a teaching assistant reaching out to you. It could be a student mentor reaching out to you. So there are multiple interventions that we can define where we can make sure that we pull up the student, where we can call you, we can send you an email and say, hey, looks like you're struggling with this, or this is where you need some support. What can we do to help you, and provide that help. But to be honest, we are still, as I said, there's a lot of data available. We are still scratching the surface, but eventually what we would like to do is, based on this data that we have, create multiple tracks in a program, right? That's one of the easiest things to do. So let me give you an example. When we launched our first data science program, it was the same curriculum for all 2,000 people who do the program. But eventually what we realized with all of these signals is that, look, not everybody is going to become a data scientist at Facebook after this program, right? Somebody can just become a data engineer in Infosys, and that's a great outcome for a lot of people. So let's focus on how do you classify and how do you drive those outcomes for each one of them. So the last 6 months of the program, we have divided into 5 tracks. Could be a data engineer, could be a data scientist, X, Y, and Z. And based on your starting point, your aspirations, and what we have seen in the program in terms of all the data that we have, we suggest which one you should pick up to achieve your career outcome. So a lot of work we are doing on that front to deliver outcomes for our learners. And I think it's a continuous exercise. As I said, it's just scratching the surface still. And eventually, as I said, it's a long-term game for us, and we'll need to figure out how to think of each learner as an individual who we are providing these outcomes to eventually.
Thank you, Phalgun. And maybe the last question that's coming, which is to Akshay, before we move into breakout rooms. You know, Akshay, there's been a lot of immigration policy change around the world. Particularly where I'm sitting right now in the US, you know, as political parties have changed, and even if you look at the news today, and obviously student flows therefore have also changed a fair bit. Can you just comment on what you're seeing, and obviously it may change again going forward, and how that's affected how you see student, you know, higher education student flows around the world?
Sure. So very interestingly, I think, Anshul, in a post-COVID world, or I would say in 2021 and beyond, the whole world has been divided into 2 zones, green zones and red zones. Green zones being countries where the leaders have demonstrated great capability to manage the COVID crisis. These are countries like at the top of the charts, New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, Canada, to a very large degree, UK. And so that is one part of how these countries get into the green zone. The other part is how innovatively are you thinking about the international student and what they will really do in your country? So, for example, since you're sitting in the US in 2016-17, when Trump came in and said that, hey, I'm going to make it really tough for US to enter the US, I think that's when Justin Trudeau saw his opportunity and stepped up the entire immigration reform program in Canada, and that became a big draw. Similar opportunity was identified by the UK about 1.5 years back. And in June last year, officially they announced a PSW, which is a post-study work visa, which means that if you end up being in the UK starting this July, you'll get a mandatory 2-year work visa. If you're a PhD candidate, you'll get it for 3 years. So given where we are from this immigration / post-COVID management perspective, new destinations are emerging out. So a student who would have been looking at a Canada or a US back in the day is now looking at the UK. A student who would have been looking at Australia is now looking at New Zealand. Couple it with the fact that most higher education institutions have also realized that they need to compete very effectively with the online barrage of companies that is coming in, be it the coding bootcamp, be it an upskilling company, be it MOOCs, so on and so forth. And they are hence building what I call an employability lens into the program. And that is something that we're also falling through. For example, if a kid in Bombay speaks to my counselor in Mumbai, they will tell them that, hey, you came from Andheri. Out of 5 people who registered on a platform from Andheri last year, these 3 went to University of Reading in the UK, and 2 of these are working in Ernst & Young, and 1 is working in this data science job in Birmingham somewhere. And that is then how this person will be able to visualize that they will be able to get a job right after they go to this college. And that is very, very important, because I realize very strongly that this is not supposed to be a degree collection exercise. The outcome, like for me, my outcome is not a learning outcome. My outcome is, and the typical student on the platform is, while we have those folks who get into Stanford and Columbia and Cornell and all of those fancy schools, 90% of folks on the platform are not those dreaming about Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. They are saying that, they're not saying that, Mummy, Papa, I want to go to Harvard, Stanford. They're saying that, Mummy, Papa, please give me 20 lakh rupees. I want to go to University of Reading because it's in the UK, because UK has a great immigration policy. I swear on you, I'll work really, really hard. I'll get a job in the UK, and I'm going to make sure that you end up in the UK as well after this program. It will give us a great chance as a family to level up our life. And that is how the student is really thinking about their life outcome right now. Hence, it's very important that I build out the immigration layer. I build out, since you rightly pointed out, and I also built a very strong employment layer as well. And that is something that we're focused on, and that is something that how we also counsel our students right from day 0. And given that same breadth of thought, I think UK has done fantastically well. Canada has done very well as well. In the US, I saw the news as well. I also hear that the Biden-Harris combine is changing a lot of rules in the US starting April 12th, if I hear it correctly. And at the other end, countries like Australia and New Zealand are completely closed. So a lot of that is going to reshift. That gives a great opportunity for companies like us to come in and take a lot of the business away from traditional folks as well, who have been more active in the space. It's a very fragmented industry, and but interesting times, and a lot of cool stuff is going to happen. Thank you for asking that question.
No, not. Look, I think higher education in the US or all over the world is going through some fundamental change. If we talk about outcomes and what kind of outcomes young students receive after a 4-year college degree, and for what cost, we're starting to see very disruptive models in the US. And what I think is interesting is, if we had more time, the link, we've talked about your 3 areas very separately, but as you look at that disruption in higher education, how does UpGrad and what Phalgun is doing and upskilling companies, how does that affect higher education as a whole? Or as even younger people start to look at direct K-12 to employment models, I think there's, that could be a really interesting conversation, how things cut across your areas. But I know we're getting short of time, and the WISE team has organized this wonderful opportunity for us to get to know one another in breakout groups. So with that, let me hand over back to Victoria, and also thank Victoria as the kind of organizer, and thank WISE and each of you for packing so much insight into such a short amount of time. So thank you to each of you. And with that, let me hand back to Victoria.
Thank you, Anshul. And yes, once again, thank you so much to our panelists. I mean, a great session, and I can already see in the chat, people are really reacting well to some of the insights that you've shared. So thank you again so much.